My wife didn't listen to me, so I boarded our flight and left without her. I know how this sounds, but hear me out. My wife and I have a 21-year-old daughter, Jess, who goes to college out of state. Over the summer she was employed by her university and was able to stay in the dorms. After summer she was moving out of the dorms and into her own apartment off campus. My wife and I live in the Pacific Northwest and usually go to visit Jess a couple times throughout the semester, typically on parents' weekend and move-out day. She also comes home during the holidays. Let me start by saying that traveling with my wife is not a great experience. I like to have everything organized and make sure that we get where we need to be early, especially when traveling. My wife is the opposite, as she's a very go with the flow and we will get there when we get there type of person. I do my best to meet in the middle with her, but not when traveling by plane. Last year, during parents' weekend, my wife and I were going to fly out to see Jess on the East Coast. Our flight was at 10 a.m. Our airport isn't huge by any means, but it's not a tiny airport either. I told my wife that we needed to be at the airport 90 minutes early. We live 30 minutes away from the airport, so I wanted to leave at the very latest by 8, since we would also need to park and walk a little bit. I of course got up at 6 to make sure everything was ready and accounted for. My wife does not like to get up early. It took me attempting to wake her up 5 times before she eventually got up at 7:40, then wanted to make coffee, shower, and eat a bowl of cereal. Let's just say that we didn't leave the house until 9. It ended up being busier at the airport than normal, likely due to many colleges having parents' weekend, and it took so long to get through security that we missed our flight. Rightly so, the airline refused to refund our ticket. We were able to get new tickets, but not until the next day, causing us to miss Friday afternoon and Saturday morning with our daughter. Jess was disappointed to say the least. Fast forward to now. We were flying down for a long weekend to Jess move. We take one flight from our town to a bigger town nearby, then fly from there to my daughter's college town. Again, it was a long morning of me pushing my wife to get her to move along. Due to the last airport mishap, I wanted to make sure I told her we needed to leave extra early, so that we wouldn't miss our flight again. We got there on time with a bit of extra time to spare, and my wife was annoyed. She kept going on about how now we just have to sit and wait for 45 minutes for them to start boarding. We took our first flight and landed in the connecting city, at a much larger airport. We only had about 1 hour of layover. We got off the plane at 9:15, and our next plane started boarding at 9:40. We had to take multiple rails to get there from where we landed to our terminal. We got to our terminal and had about 15 minutes until our plane was set to board. My wife tells me that she wants to get coffee. There was a little market next to our terminal that sold hot food and coffee. I asked if she wanted me to go grab it for her. "No, I want Starbucks," she said. Well, Starbucks was a rail ride away, and a little bit of a walk. I told her we couldn't do that, as we didn't have enough time for it. She stated that we had enough time, and if I wouldn't go with her, she would go by herself. I tried to discourage her, but she was determined. She walked away, at a brisk pace for her, and said she would be back in time. 15 minutes went by and she was nowhere to be seen. They started calling boarding groups, so I called my wife hoping she was nearby, but she wasn't picking up her phone. They called a few groups, and then eventually called ours. In a panic, I called my wife again, 3 times, and finally on the last call she answered. She said she was on her way, and that it was a long line at Starbucks and she had to wait a bit. I told her they were almost done with boarding and she needed to hurry up. I waited by the gate, but the attendant said they would need to shut the gate in 2 minutes. I waited and waited, but my wife didn't show up. The attendant asked if I wanted to board, otherwise, she was closing the gate. I tried to plead with her to wait a couple of minutes, but she insisted that she couldn't. So I said screw it and boarded the plane. A few minutes later my wife called me saying the attendant won't let her on, and they had already removed the boarding ramp at that point. She told me I needed to tell them to let me off the plane to be with her, but I told her no. "It's not fair to do this again to Jess," I said to her. "I told you we didn't have time, but you decided to go anyway." I told her to go purchase a new ticket for the next flight and I would see her when she arrives. She got to Jess's school and seemed unbothered by the whole situation. She didn't even really talk about it. I thought maybe she realized it was her fault and just wanted to drop it. Boy was I wrong. We are now back home and she hasn't talked to me since the trip, and it's been over a week. She continues insisting that I am an a-hole. So, am I an a-hole?